The small diner in the North District of the Orion Belt was known for three things: warm food, friendly service, and surprising guests. Traders, travelers, mechanics, and explorers all stopped by at some point. But even among these strange visitors, one customer always stood out more than anyone else: a dragon. His name was Razkor, the Emberclaw, one of the most recognizable draconians in the district. He was tall enough to touch the ceiling if he lifted his head too high. His wings, when folded, still reached almost to the floor. His scales were a deep copper color, glowing faintly under the lights like heated metal, and his eyes, bright golden, could make almost anyone step aside when he entered a room. But despite his intimidating appearance, Razkor never caused trouble inside the diner. In fact, he acted almost gentle. He always entered quietly, always chose the same corner seat, and always ordered the same meal. And Mira, the head waitress, was the only one who served him without fear. A calm morning begins. On this particular morning, the diner was buzzing with energy. The air smelled of fresh bread and warm coffee. People talked about work shifts, new shipments, and traveling schedules. The sunlight outside reflected off the tall windows, filling the diner with a soft, golden glow. Mira moved between tables with practiced steps, a friendly smile on her face. She was used to the morning rush by now. Even though she was human and much smaller than many alien customers, she handled everyone with equal confidence. She placed a plate on a table and turned around to head back to the kitchen, when the bell above the door chimed softly. Her smile widened. Razkor stepped inside. The conversation in the diner softened for a few seconds. Not because people disliked dragons, but because Razkor was impossible to ignore. His presence filled the air like warm heat from a sunbeam. Mira walked up to him, holding a small notepad. "Good morning, Razkor," she said brightly. "Good morning, Mira," he replied, lowering his head politely. "The usual, please." She nodded and gestured toward his favorite table. "You can sit. I'll bring it in a moment." Razkor walked toward the corner seat, careful not to bump anything with his wings. He sat down, folding his legs neatly and lowering his head so he didn't hit the hanging lights. He looked around the diner, watching people, listening to the quiet hum of morning conversation. He always enjoyed this place. It felt peaceful, safe, normalized. Something different in the air. But today, something felt different. Razkor sensed it the moment he walked inside. The air carried a strange tension, like a thin thread pulled tight, ready to snap. He didn't know why. Nothing in the diner was out of place. The customers acted normal, the food smelled the same. But his instincts were sharp. And Mira, there was something different about her too. She moved normally, but her smile seemed smaller. Her eyes seemed tired. And when she reached up to grab a stack of napkins, the sleeve of her uniform shifted, just enough for Razkor to see something he instantly recognized. A bruise. A dark, fresh, painful-looking mark just above her elbow. Razkor's eyes narrowed slightly. He did not move. He did not make a sound. But something inside him hardened or heated, like a slow-burning ember. Dragons rarely ignored details, especially details like this. When Mira returned with his food, Razkor observed her closely. She placed the plate in front of him with steady hands, but he noticed the way she quickly pulled her sleeve down again. "Mira," he said softly, "are you well today?" Her smile froze for a second. "Yes, everything is fine." But she didn't meet his eyes. Razkor tilted his head slightly. "Your arm, does it hurt?" She immediately shook her head. "No, I'm okay. Just bumped into something." Her voice was too quick, too forced, too practiced. Razkor knew that tone. He had heard it from young dragons who tried to hide bruises from rough training. He had heard it from old dragons who didn't want to show weakness. He knew exactly what it meant. She was not telling the full truth. But Razkor didn't push her. Dragons had learned, sometimes painfully, that humans didn't like being pressured. So he simply nodded and ate quietly, even though his thoughts were no longer calm. Watching the room. As Mira moved away, Razkor noticed two men sitting near the window. Human men. Both wearing dark jackets, stiff boots, and rough expressions. Their clothes suggested they worked dangerous jobs, but their attitude suggested something else entirely. They weren't eating much, they weren't talking much, but they kept watching Mira. Whenever she passed by their table, their eyes followed her. Their shoulders relaxed in a way that looked too comfortable, like they knew something she didn't want them to know. One of them whispered something to the other. The second man smirked. Razkor's tail flicked sharply under the table. Something was wrong. He continued eating, but he kept his eyes on the two men, not glaring, just observing. Dragons were good at that, seeing things without being seen themselves. The men noticed him eventually. They stiffened for a moment, whispered again, then pretended to look at the menu. But Razkor wasn't fooled. Small signs, big meaning. Mira continued working, but Razkor saw more signs of tension. She dropped a cup once, not from clumsiness but from distraction. She apologized quickly, even though the customer said it was fine. Her smile faded too fast. Her shoulders tensed whenever the bell above the door rang. And Razkor, who normally ate slowly and enjoyed every flavor, found himself rushing through his meal, not because he was hungry, but because he wanted answers. When Mira returned to refill his drink, Razkor leaned forward slightly. "Mira," he said, keeping his voice gentle, "if someone has bothered you, you can tell me." She froze again. Then she forced a smile. "No one bothered me. I promise." Razkor tilted his head. "You are certain?" "Yes," she whispered. But her eyes were not certain. Her eyes were worried. Razkor didn't press her further. He simply nodded and watched her walk away. The moment she stepped near the two men, they leaned slightly toward her, pretending to ask something harmless. But Mira's nervous body language said everything Razkor needed to know. He could see the tiny flinch in her shoulders. He could see the way she kept her head down. He could feel the fear she tried so hard to hide. Dragons respected strength, but they also respected honesty. And Mira was not okay. The dragon's quiet decision. Razkor finished his meal slowly. The diner noise continued as normal, but to him every sound felt dim. Every detail narrowed down to one truth. Someone had frightened Mira. Someone had caused that bruise. Someone had made her feel unsafe in her own workplace. And Razkor did not like that. Not at all. When the two men finally stood to leave, one of them whispered something to Mira at the counter. Mira nodded quickly, almost too quickly. The men walked out of the diner with confident steps. Razkor's eyes followed them until they disappeared down the street. He stayed seated for another minute, thinking. A long, deep, slow breath filled his lungs. Mira approached him again. "Do you need anything else?" "No," he said softly, "but take care of yourself." She tried to smile. "I will." But Razkor saw the truth behind her eyes. He rose from his seat, careful not to bump anything with his wings. He placed payment on the table. Then, before leaving, he looked at Mira one last time. "You are not alone," he said quietly. Mira blinked, surprised. "Razkor!" He nodded once. "Good day, Mira." Then he turned and walked out of the diner, the soft bell chiming behind him. His steps were steady, his wings were still folded. His eyes were calm. But inside, something powerful had awakened. A dragon's instinct. And dragons never ignored their instincts. Razkor the Emberclaw returned to the small diner the next morning, but he did not enter the same way he usually did. Normally, he pushed the door gently with one claw and stepped inside with a calm expression, pretending that his huge wings and tall draconian body were perfectly normal in a place built for humans. Today, however, something was different. His steps were slower. His eyes searched the room the moment he stepped inside, as if he expected trouble to appear out of thin air. The diner was busy. Humans sat at tables eating early breakfasts, talking about work, trade routes, and news from nearby space stations. A few alien travelers sat in the corner booth, studying maps on glowing tablets. The air smelled like warm bread, eggs, and fresh coffee. Everything seemed normal, but Roscor's gaze kept moving, scanning each table, every doorway, every unfamiliar face. The reason for his tension arrived a few seconds later. Mira stepped out from behind the counter with her usual friendly smile. She carried a tray filled with drinks, moving quickly between tables with practiced steps. At a first glance, she looked fine, but Roscor was not fooled. His eyes went straight to her right arm. Even though she tried to hide it under her sleeve, he could still see the faint shape of the bruise from yesterday. He felt a sharp, uncomfortable heat inside his chest. Not anger. Not yet. It was something deeper, something older. A draconian instinct connected to protection, territory, and loyalty, instincts he normally kept buried. But seeing Mira like this woke them up. When Mira noticed Roscor, her smile turned brighter. She walked toward him and placed a menu on the table, even though she knew he always ordered the same thing. She was simply being polite, and Roscor respected that. Very few humans treated him like a normal customer. "Good morning." "Roscor," she said calmly. "Your usual?" Roscor nodded, his golden eyes watching her every movement. "Yes, the same as always." She wrote down the order, her hand steady. But when she turned to walk away, Roscor noticed her shoulders tense for a brief moment, as if she were hiding a silent worry. He wanted to ask her about the bruises. He wanted to know who or what had hurt her, but he also knew humans sometimes hated being questioned directly, especially in public. So he waited. When Mira returned with his food, a large plate of protein strips, scrambled eggs, and spiced grain, Roscor cleared his throat, a deep rumble that made two nearby customers glance over nervously. He lowered his voice before speaking. "Mira," he said softly, "your arm, is it painful?" For a moment, Mira froze. Her smile stayed, but her eyes shifted away. "Oh, it's nothing. I just bumped into a shelf in the storage room." Roscor knew this was not true. Mira was careful, fast, balanced. She moved through the diner with the ease of someone who had worked here for years. He doubted she would walk into a shelf hard enough to leave a mark like that. Still, he kept his tone calm. "Be honest with me. Did someone hurt you?" Mira shook her head quickly. No, nothing like that, really." But she did not meet his eyes. That was enough for Roscor to understand. She was frightened of something, or someone. The dragon leaned back in his seat, his wings folding tightly against his back. He carefully picked up a fork with two claws, a skill he had learned only because Mira once showed him how to make less noise while eating. He appreciated that memory. But today, his mind was too busy to enjoy his meal. He scanned the diner again. Two men sitting near the window were watching Mira a little too closely. Their clothes were clean but worn out in places, like they worked security jobs or physical labor. They whispered to each other whenever Mira passed by. One of them tapped something into a communicator device. Roscor noticed everything. He lowered his voice again. "Mira," he said, "those men. Do you know them?" She glanced briefly toward the window, then quickly looked away. "They're just customers." Roscor's eyes narrowed. Mira's answer came too quickly, too practiced. He gently pushed his plate aside, his appetite gone, The heat inside his chest grew warmer, not painful, but strong. Dragons had many instincts: hunger, pride, territorial strength, but this one was different. It was the instinct to protect someone who showed them kindness. Razkor had not felt that in years. Mira tried to continue serving tables as if nothing were wrong, but Razkor watched her carefully, noticing every forced smile, every stiff movement. She moved faster than usual, as if she wanted to finish her shift as soon as possible. After some time, she returned to Razkor's table to refill his drink. He looked at her with calm, steady eyes. "If someone is troubling you, tell me," he said softly. "I do not like seeing you frightened." Mira swallowed, her confidence cracking for a moment. She almost said something. He could see it in her expression. But then she decided against it. She simply shook her head. "I'm okay, Razkor. Really." But again she avoided his gaze. Razkor did not push her further. He understood that forcing the truth out of someone often made things worse. Instead, he changed his method. He waited quietly, studying the flow of the diner. Dragons were hunters by nature. They noticed patterns, behavior, danger, and something dangerous was happening here. The two men near the window got up to leave. As they passed by Mira, one of them leaned close and whispered something. Mira nodded quickly, her shoulders tightening again. The men smirked and walked out the door. Razkor's eyes followed them until they disappeared down the street. That was enough. When Mira came back to clear the table, Razkor spoke again. "Those men, they spoke to you. What did they say?" Mira set the plate down a little too hard. The noise startled her. She took a deep breath and forced a smile. "Just reminding us to pay for security services. That's all." Razkor felt the heat inside him spike. "Security services," he repeated slowly. "Are they protecting this place?" Mira hesitated. "Well, no, not exactly. They just make sure nothing bad happens." Razkor stared at her, his golden eyes glowing faintly. "Yet something bad already happened. To you." She froze. Razkor lowered his voice even further, a deep rumble that only she could hear. "Mira, if someone is demanding money, threatening you, or causing fear, that is not protection. That is control." She opened her mouth as if to argue, but then closed it again. Her eyes softened, and her voice came out quieter. "Razkor, please don't do anything. It'll only get worse if anyone tries to interfere." The dragon leaned forward slightly. "They already made it worse." A trembling breath escaped her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The diner continued its normal noise around them, but between Mira and Razkor, the world felt strangely quiet, like a storm waiting to break. Finally, Mira whispered, "I just don't want trouble." Razkor nodded slowly. "I understand, but trouble has already found you." She blinked back the hint of fear in her eyes and gave him a small, tired smile. "You're a good friend, Razkor, but this isn't your problem." The dragon looked at her calmly. "You are in my territory. That makes it my problem." Mira didn't know what to say. Razkor finished his drink, rose from his seat, and stepped outside. He did not roar. He did not break anything. He simply walked out the door with quiet, heavy steps. But inside him, something had changed. He had made up his mind. Someone had frightened Mira. Someone had hurt her. And Razkor the Emberclaw would find out who, without violence, without chaos, but with the one thing dragons were feared for, unshakable determination. Razkor the Emberclaw walked through the busy streets outside the diner with slow, thoughtful steps. His mind was heavy, like a storm cloud gathering strength. He did not roar or growl. He did not spread his wings or show anger. Instead, he moved with a quiet focus that only came to him when something mattered deeply. And today, something mattered more than usual. Mira's bruises, her trembling hands, her fearful eyes whenever those two men appeared. Razkor had spent years in the Orion Belt, learning how humans behaved, how their businesses worked, how their small shops struggled to survive among bigger forces. He had seen fear before, but not in someone who worked as hard as Mira, someone who always smiled, always stayed kind, even to creatures 3 times her size. That alone made the situation personal. As Razkor walked, his mind replayed every small detail from the diner. Mira refusing to explain, the men whispering something to her, her sudden fear, her forced smiles. These were signs he could not ignore. He headed toward the old cargo yard where his gang usually gathered. The path was long, passing through markets, repair stations, and food stalls where travelers from different species stopped for supplies. A few people stared as he walked by. Dragons were not common in this district, but no one approached him. Most simply stepped aside, giving him space. The cargo yard stood at the end of a wide street filled with stacked metal containers, old spacecraft parts, and large crates. His gang used the empty sections of the yard as their base. It wasn't glamorous, but it was private, safe, and comfortable enough for dragons who preferred open space and high structures. When Razkor entered, several of his gang members lifted their heads. They were different sizes and shapes, some young, some old, some missing scales from past battles, others wearing scrap metal jewelry. They were outcasts, wanderers, misunderstood creatures who followed Razkor because he treated them fairly. One of them, a lean dragon named Vezra, tilted her head. "Boss, you're back early. Everything okay?" Razkor's wings folded tightly behind him. "No," he said simply. "Everything is not okay." The other dragons gathered around, sensing the seriousness in his voice. Razkor rarely sounded troubled unless something important was happening. "What happened?" asked Korin, a strong dragon with bronze scales and a gentle personality. Razkor breathed slowly before answering. "A human in my territory has been threatened." The yard grew quiet. Dragons normally avoided human problems unless they involved trade, safety, or territory. But Razkor's gang wasn't a typical draconian group. They respected him not because of fear or strength, but because he protected the weak when needed, even if the weak were humans. Vezra blinked. "Threatened? How?" Razkor explained carefully, without raising his voice. "2 men visited the diner today. Mira grew frightened when she saw them. She has bruises she refuses to talk about. They told her something before leaving. She fears them, and I fear they are part of something larger." Korin frowned. "Are they criminals?" Razkor nodded slowly. "They call themselves security contractors, but they provide no real safety. They demand money. They pressure small shops. They frighten honest workers." The gang murmured in frustration. They had seen such groups before, not just humans, but across many species. People who pretended to offer protection while doing the opposite. Razkor lifted his head. "I want to know everything about them. Who they are, where they come from, why they are bothering Mira and her diner." Vezra's eyes brightened. "So, you want us to follow them? Gather information?" "Yes," Razkor answered, "but with no confrontation, no fights, no threats. Not yet." The dragons nodded. They respected his rules. Razkor did not want violence. He wanted the truth. And dragons could gather information better than most. They could fly, hide, listen, and observe without being noticed. Korin stepped forward. "Who are these men exactly? Do you know their names?" Razkor remembered Mira's nervous whisper. "Their leader is called Varric Holt." The gang growled softly, not in aggression, but in recognition. "I've heard that name," Vezra said. "A mercenary, ex-military, runs a small private crew. They work like a shadow business. No official contracts, no government approval." Another dragon, Lithor, spoke up. They usually choose weak targets. Small stores, family shops, small ships, places that can't defend themselves. Razkor's jaw tightened. Then they have chosen wrong this time? The gang fell silent again. They understood what he meant. When someone harmed someone in Razkor's territory, he took it seriously. But still, he wanted no violence. The sun above the cargo yard was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the metal containers. Razkor's scales reflected warm golden light, making him look like a statue carved of shining fire. He closed his eyes for a moment, thinking. He remembered how Mira always served him with respect, even on days when he was in a bad mood. How she never feared his size or his sharp claws. How she once joked that his wings almost touched the ceiling and offered to adjust his chair to make him comfortable. Little things, but important things. He opened his eyes again. We begin tonight. Quiet observation. Nothing more. The dragons nodded and separated to prepare. Later, as the sky darkened, Razkor stood on top of a high metal container, watching the city lights flicker across the horizon. His gang spread out across different directions. Some took to the skies, flying low between buildings. Others moved on foot, blending into shadows. Dragons had many strengths, and silence was one of them when they wanted it to be. Razkor watched Vezra fly toward the area where Varric Holt's crew was likely operating. Her wings were thin but strong, perfect for gliding unnoticed. Corin moved toward the market district where he could blend in with the noise. Lithor headed toward the docking bay, where mercenaries often hung around. Razkor stayed behind for a moment, thinking carefully. He wanted to go investigate himself, but he knew his large size made him too noticeable, and this mission required subtlety. Patience was not always easy for dragons, but Razkor forced himself to wait. He remained on the container for almost an hour, watching the stars slowly appear. Then he heard wings approaching from behind. Vezra landed beside him lightly. "Boss," she said, breathing a little faster than normal, "I found something." Razkor turned to her. "Tell me." She folded her wings. "I found Varric Holt's compound. It's in an old storage building near the South District. Looks abandoned from outside, but it's active inside. Guards, equipment, vehicles." Razkor nodded slowly. "Did they mention the diner?" "Yes," Vezra said. "I heard two men talking. They said the diner is behind on payments. They said they need to remind Mira again tonight." She hesitated. "Boss? They think the diner is easy to scare." Razkor's eyes glowed with quiet fire. Not anger, but something deeper, the instinct to protect. "Thank you, Vezra," he said softly. "You did well." Corin and Lithor returned next, sharing more information. Everything pointed to the same truth. Varric Holt's group ran a pressure scheme. They chose targets that couldn't fight back, and Mira was one of those targets. Razkor looked over the city again, the lights reflecting in his golden eyes. His decision was made. But he did not want a fight, not a single claw or tooth raised. That was not the way to solve this. Instead, he wanted something else, something dragons were famous for even more than strength. Presence, a quiet, unshakable presence that made others rethink their choices. He turned to his gang. "Tomorrow morning, I will visit Varric Holt." The dragons exchanged looks. "No threats," Razkor continued. "No battles, no destruction. Only words, but words spoken with clarity." "And if they don't listen?" Vezra asked carefully. Razkor looked toward the horizon, his expression calm but powerful. "Then I will remind them," he said softly, "that even a dragon can solve problems peacefully. But peace has limits." The gang nodded with respect. They understood the message. Tomorrow would change everything, not with violence, but with courage. And for the first time in many years, Razkor felt something warm in his chest that wasn't fire. Purpose. The next morning arrived with a soft orange sunrise spreading across the Orion Belt's small settlement. Traders opened their stalls, small hover carts rolled across the streets, and the usual morning noise filled the air. But today, something unusual was about to happen, something no one in the district had seen in years. Razkor, the Ember Claw, leader of the Draconian gang, walked with a steady rhythm toward the South District. His wings were folded tightly behind him, his steps calm, his face unreadable. He did not look angry. He did not look excited. He looked resolved. He knew exactly what he was going to do. Behind him, the rest of his gang stayed hidden among the rooftops and alleys, watching silently. Razkor had told them to stay away from the main building to avoid creating fear. He wanted to handle the conversation alone, with patience, clarity, and the strength of his presence. The building he was heading toward looked abandoned. Rusted metal sheets covered the sides, and the windows were sealed with dark screens. At a glance, it appeared like an old storage facility that had been left untouched for years. But Razkor already knew the truth from the previous night's investigation. The building was not abandoned. It was Varric Holt's headquarters. Razkor stopped a few steps away from the large front door. He looked at it with quiet focus, then gently tapped on it with one claw, not a loud knock, but firm enough to be heard inside. For a moment, there was silence. Then the door slid open halfway, revealing a young guard with messy hair and a nervous expression. He stared up at Razkor with wide eyes, almost dropping the tablet he was holding. Can I help you?" the guard stammered. Razkor lowered his head slightly, his golden eyes calm. "I am here to speak with Varric Holt." The guard blinked rapidly. "Varric, do you have an appointment?" "No," Razkor said softly, "but he will want to speak with me." The guard swallowed hard and peeked inside the building. I'm not sure." Razkor tilted his head. "Tell him Razkor the Emberclaw requests a moment." The guard's eyes widened again. He clearly recognized the name. Without another word, he rushed inside, leaving the door halfway open. Razkor waited patiently. He didn't move. He didn't pace. He simply stood still, like a tall flame frozen in time. After a few minutes, heavy footsteps echoed from inside. The door opened fully, and Varric Holt himself stepped out. He was tall for a human, with a strong build, short dark hair, and a long coat that looked expensive. His expression showed annoyance mixed with confusion. He stopped in front of Razkor, crossing his arms. "I heard you wanted to talk. Strange. Dragons aren't usually the talking type." Razkor's voice remained steady. "Then today must be unusual." Varric chuckled. "Well, here I am. What do you want?" Razkor studied Varric's face without hostility. "I want to discuss a diner in the North District." Varric raised an eyebrow. "The Little Human Restaurant? What about it?" Razkor took a calm breath. "Your men visited yesterday. They spoke to the waitress, Mira. She looked frightened." Varric rubbed the back of his neck. "We just collect security fees. It's a business. Why does a dragon care?" Razkor's gaze remained firm. "Because harm entered my territory." Varric frowned. "Harm?" "No one hurt her." Razkor tilted his head slightly. "Not physically, perhaps, but fear is also harm." There was silence for a moment. Varric's expression shifted, becoming guarded. Razkor continued, his voice calm and clear. "Mira is a worker. She serves food. She keeps the diner running. She has never caused trouble. Yet your men pressure her. They frighten her. They demand something she cannot give." Varric sighed. "Look, it's simple. We keep the area safe. They pay us. That's how it works." Razkor's eyes glowed faintly, not with anger, but with conviction. Safe from what? The area is calm. No threats exist except the ones you create. Varric opened his mouth to argue, but Roscor continued before he could. You ask small businesses for money. If they refuse, you return. This is not safety. This is control. Varric's jaw tightened. And you came here to tell me this? Why? What's she to you? Roscor paused. His wings moved slightly like a soft shift of wind. She is kind, he said simply. And kindness is rare. When something rare is harmed, attention is required. For the first time, Varric looked unsure. He scratched his chin. So, what exactly are you asking for? Roscor leaned forward slightly. I want your men to stop visiting the diner. I want Mira and the owner to work without fear. I want your crew to stay away from their business. Varric let out a small laugh, but it wasn't confident. More confused. You're asking me to give up a source of income because a waitress smiled at you? Roscor did not react to the tease. He answered calmly. No. I am asking you to consider the fairness of your choices. Varric opened his mouth, then closed it again. He paced in a small circle. This is very unusual. Dragons don't normally involve themselves in human shops. Roscor nodded. Correct. Dragons usually avoid human matters unless they interfere with territory. Varric stopped pacing. So this is about territory? Roscor's eyes narrowed slightly but remained gentle. This is about respect. The word hung in the air like a slow-moving flame. Varric looked at the ground for a moment, then raised his eyes again. Roscor, I understand what you're saying. I do. But my men aren't exactly gentle. They won't be happy if I pull them back. Roscor folded his wings tighter. Then speak to them clearly. You are their leader. Varric sighed. They listen to me. Most of the time. Roscor softened his voice. Then listen now. The diner does not owe you fear. Leave them be. There was another long silence. The guard from before peeked through the doorway, watching nervously. Somewhere above, two of Roscor's dragons observed quietly from a rooftop, ready to step in if anything went wrong, but Roscor didn't need them. Finally, Varric rubbed his forehead. All right, fine. He exhaled slowly. I'll pull my men away from the diner. They won't visit again. You have my word. Roscor nodded once. Good. That is all I came for. Varric hesitated, then asked softly, Why? Why do you care so much about humans? They don't usually care about dragons. Roscor's expression softened for the first time. Because some humans treat even a dragon with simple respect. And simple respect deserves protection. Varric looked down again, almost ashamed. I understand. Roscor stepped back, giving a polite bow of his head. Thank you for listening. To Varric's surprise, Roscor turned around and began walking away, his wings trailing behind him like a royal cloak. No threats, no shouts, no destruction, only calm determination. Before Roscor reached the end of the street, Varric called out, Hey, Emberclaw! Roscor paused and turned his head. You're different from other dragons, Varric said quietly. Roscor answered in a low, steady tone. Different is not always bad. Varric nodded slowly. Roscor walked away without another word. High above, his dragons disappeared from the rooftops, following him quietly. The entire district felt the shift. Not because a battle had taken place, but because a powerful creature had shown restraint, strength without violence, courage without claws. It was the kind of moment that people would whisper about for days, the kind of moment that proved something important. Sometimes, the strongest fire is the one that stays calm. The next morning began quietly at the small diner in the North District. The sky was pale blue, and the soft glow of early sunlight spilled across the windows. Mira unlocked the door, flipped the open sign, and began her usual preparations. She brewed coffee, arranged plates, cleaned the tables, and checked the inventory. But today felt different. The air seemed lighter. Her steps felt easier. Even the shadows inside the diner felt less frightening. For the first time in many days, Mira felt a little safer. She didn't know why the uneasy pressure inside her chest had faded so suddenly, but she was grateful for the change. She hoped it wasn't temporary. She hoped Varric Holt's men wouldn't return today. She hoped she could breathe normally again. The bell above the door jingled, and Mira turned with a polite smile, only to see a very familiar shape duck through the doorway. Razkor the Emberclaw entered the diner. His tall form and broad wings made the room look smaller, but his presence brought Mira a sense of comfort she didn't fully understand. He walked slowly, with calm confidence, and his golden eyes searched the room before settling on her. "Good morning, Mira," he said in his deep, warm voice. Mira returned the greeting, a real smile forming on her face this time. "Good morning, Razkor. Your usual?" "Yes," he replied with a small nod. "Thank you." As Mira wrote down the order, she noticed something different about him. He looked peaceful, not tense like yesterday, not watchful like the day before. His wings rested easily, his shoulders relaxed. She wondered what had happened. While she prepared his meal, she kept glancing toward the windows nervously. But no strange men appeared. No shadows lingered outside the glass. No one watched her with unfriendly eyes. Razkor noticed her checking the windows. When she brought his food, he spoke quietly. "The men who bothered you? They will not return." Mira froze, the tray in her hands wobbling slightly. "What? How?" Razkor continued calmly. "I spoke with Varric Holt yesterday. I asked him to leave the diner alone." Mira blinked in surprise. "You talked to him?" "Yes." "No fighting? No. Fire everywhere?" she asked nervously. Razkor shook his head. "No. Just words. Words are powerful when used correctly." Mira slowly set the tray down, trying to understand the weight of what he had done. "You went there alone?" "Yes," he answered. "Because fear is a heavy burden. You should not have to carry it." Mira swallowed hard. She felt emotion rising in her chest, relief mixed with gratitude and disbelief. Nobody had ever stood up for her before, not like this. And the fact that a dragon, of all beings, chose to protect her made her feel strangely honored. "Razkor, why would you do that for me?" she asked softly. He lifted his gaze, his golden eyes warm. "Because you treat me like a person, not a monster, not a danger, not something strange, just a customer. A friend." Mira smiled, a soft, sincere smile. "I treat you like that because that's what you are," she said warmly. Razkor looked at her carefully, as though studying a rare treasure. "Then know this. Your kindness has value. And when something valuable is hurt, someone must stand for it." Mira sat across from him for a moment, letting his words settle. She didn't fully understand dragon instincts or draconian values, but she could feel the sincerity in his voice. It was calm, deep, and protective. Not possessive, not aggressive. Just protective. And that made her heart feel light. As the morning went on, customers entered the diner in small groups. Everything felt normal again. The usual conversations filled the room, talk about work, repairs, early morning travel, and simple life. Mira was busy moving between tables, but today she worked with confidence rather than fear. Razkor watched quietly while eating his food. For once, he wasn't studying the room for danger. He simply enjoyed his meal, his presence calm and steady. At one point, an older man approached Mira and whispered, "Those security boys didn't show up today. Did something happen?" Mira smiled, glancing subtly at the dragon sitting at his usual spot. Let's just say things were handled. The old man followed her gaze and chuckled. Ah, that explains it. Razkor pretended he didn't hear, though the slight lift of his tail gave away his amusement. Later, when the diner slowed down, Mira returned to Razkor's table with a cup of fresh tea, something he had once mentioned enjoying, even though dragons didn't drink it often. "This is for you," she said. "It's on the house." Razkor looked almost confused. "You do not need to give me free things." "It's not free," Mira said. "It's a thank you." Razkor lowered his head politely and accepted the cup with a careful claw. He took a small sip, letting the warmth settle in his throat. "You have nothing to fear now," he assured her. "Varric Holt understands. He gave his word." Mira relaxed into her chair. "Thank you, Razkor. Really. I can't explain how much this means." "You do not need to explain," he said softly. "Your safety is enough." Mira chuckled quietly. "You know, I always thought dragons like to solve problems with claws and fire." Razkor looked slightly offended but amused. "We are not wild animals. Dragons are capable of diplomacy." "And you did exactly that," Mira said proudly. Razkor nodded. When the morning rush ended, Mira stepped outside for a short break. To her surprise, Razkor followed and stood beside her, watching the street. "Do you feel better now?" he asked. Mira inhaled deeply. "Yes, much better." The wind gently blew her hair, and Razkor watched it with interest. Humans were small, delicate creatures, but Mira was strong in her own way. Strong enough to smile despite fear. Strong enough to stay kind despite pressure. Razkor admired that. After a moment, Mira asked, "Will your gang be okay? Did they mind that you helped me?" Razkor shook his head. "They understand. They trust my choices. And they dislike unfairness." Mira laughed lightly. "I didn't know dragons cared about fairness." Razkor tilted his head thoughtfully. "We do not care about all human ideas, but fairness, yes. It is one of the few human concepts we respect." Mira felt warmth in her heart. "Well, I'm glad you chose to help." Razkor looked at her gently. "I would choose again." There was a quiet pause between them, comfortable, warm, and filled with something unspoken. Then Mira smiled brightly. "You know, if you ever want to try something different from your usual order, I can cook something special for you." Razkor's wings twitched. "Special?" "Yes, something new. You might like it." Razkor thought for a moment. "Then, I will try it tomorrow." Mira laughed. "Deal." As the day went on, talk spread around the district. People whispered about Varric Holt's sudden change of behavior. Some said the mercenary had been visited by a dragon. Others said Varric had decided to turn honest. No one knew the full truth, but they all felt safer. And in every story, one detail stayed the same. The diner was no longer a place of fear. Razkor returned several times throughout the day, not to observe danger, but to simply check on things. Discreetly, of course. Mira noticed every time, but didn't mind. His presence didn't feel intimidating. It felt grounding. By evening, the diner was peaceful again. Mira locked the door, tired but happy. Razkor stood across the street, waiting to walk her home, as he quietly began doing without ever officially offering. "You don't have to walk with me," Mira said playfully. "I know," Razkor replied. "But I will." Mira smiled warmly. "Then I'm lucky." Razkor looked at her with gentle pride. "No, I am the lucky one." They walked down the street together. A human waitress and a dragon gang leader. An unusual pair, but a peaceful one. A pair built on respect, kindness, and quiet courage.